Downie. I'm a postdoc at Bangor University working on the Future Oak project. And the Future Oak project is a project between Bangor University Forest Research, Aberystwyth, and also the Silver Foundation. And it's another project on acute oak decline. Next slide. So you've all heard already about acute oak decline. So I'm going to keep this part of the presentation short and give you just the kind of the basics required to kind of consider acute oak decline in the context of the Future Oak project. So we've heard acute oak decline is a bacterial disease of oak trees. It's associated with necrotic bleeds, lesions, and again, an infestation by this bark boring beetle. And it can result in death of the tree within 5 years. It's not a straightforward disease, as you've also heard. It's kind of caused by this kind of complex of various abiotic and biotic factors. So you have, it's not just one bacterium, one disease. Trees are predisposed to stress with environmental factors, and then biotic things can kind of cause this decline to kind of occur. And then as well, trees that have AOD seem to show this marked shift in their microbiome, from kind of what you might call a healthy microbiome to a pathobiome, where you have particularly 3 species of bacteria that seem to cause this disease, and kind of individually they all do a little bit, and then together they seem to do a whole lot more. And this kind of raises the question, what is the role of the microbiome in general in tree health? And then can we manipulate it in order to actually help trees? Next slide. So oaks have a very extensive microbiome consisting of bacteria, fungi, archaea, etc. And on the left is this nice picture of the tomato microbiome. And basically the microbes are everywhere. They're on the leaves, they're in the tissue, they're in the roots, in the soil, and they're doing a lot of stuff. And we don't know what a lot of that stuff is, but generally it will kind of fall into one of 4 categories. So providing important resources. So the canonical example here is mycorrhizal fungi, which you can see in the bottom right here, where mycorrhizal fungi get nutrients from the soil and exchange that with their hosts for photosynthetates. Microbes will also convert nutrients to be kind of more into forms that are more available to their hosts. They can stimulate immune responses, and also, crucially, they provide protection against pathogens, either simply by kind of taking up niche space that the pathogen would need in order to kind of colonize and establish, but also by producing antimicrobial compounds themselves. And so to kind of, because we don't know a lot about what's in the oak microbiome, the kind of the first part of the Future Oak project is to do this big microbial study of oak. So we're going to look at 300 oak trees across the UK, with and without AOD. And we're going to look at the microbiome across the trees from the roots to the leaves and see what's there, and crucially see if any of the microbes we find seem to be associated with protection from disease symptoms. Next slide. And then, so the question then becomes, can we then, assuming we find anything, can we then engineer the microbiome in order to protect oak, create some kind of treatment that might protect oak trees from this disease in the future? So you might have heard of fecal microbiome transplants, where people take someone's poop and give it to someone else. And that has been found to be helpful in preventing various gut diseases. And there's been some work trying this out in plants as well. So I think a good example here is this one in the middle with tomatoes. There are 2 tomato cultivars, one resistant to a pathogen and one that's not. And they transplanted the microbiome of the resistant cultivar to the non-resistant one, and it gained a measure of resistance to the soil pathogen. And so kind of the overall goal of Future project is to then say, can we take anything that we find and actually apply this to oak trees? And I'm going to hand you over to Seumas now, and he'll tell you a bit more about oak trees and the microbiome with social sciencey stuff.
Grand, thanks, Jim. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Fantastic to be here. I'm Seumas Bates. I'm the Social Science Research Officer on the Future Oak project and an anthropologist by background. So yes, so as Jim says, this is the sort of second half of the Future Oak project, is focusing on the microbiome, but from a social science perspective, to take our sort of our sort of deep dive into understanding the microbiome, but to look at it from the perspective of some of those key stakeholders who are responsible for managing and overseeing oak woodland in the UK. So our particular sort of group, sort of stakeholder or participant focus will be looking at forest managers. Particularly, our particular focus is on private forest managers, particularly those who have relatively small to medium forests under their supervision. The sort of person who might have, say, 20 acres of woodland. There we go. Got it on the second try. Sort of small to medium plots of woodland. People who generally would have direct supervision, if that makes sense, direct supervision over their forests, over their charges. And we're going to be doing a sort of deep dive into how these forest management practices are informed or not by their understanding of the microbiome in general, and of course AOD specifically. So the first part of our research will be understanding how these managers understand problems, but also how these understandings, how this knowledge base has come to be. If an oak manager has a deep understanding of the microbiome and has a deep understanding of AOD, where has that knowledge come from? You know, what are the channels of information where this knowledge is flowing down? And similarly, if an oak manager has no real understanding of the microbiome, has no real understanding of AOD and what that is and what that might mean for their trees, why isn't that information percolating? Why isn't that information being distributed evenly across the oak management context? And our assumption, our hypothesis, if you will, is that taking a microbiomic approach, taking a microbiomic perspective on tree health may challenge certain established norms of tree care and certain established understandings of tree management. And this is basically our sort of hypothesis, basically, is that focusing on the microbiome and having and taking that as our sort of starting point for tree health may challenge sort of some of these existing health practices. So our research questions. We wish to understand how does the microbiome fit with existing understandings of oak management, oak health and tree health in general, because of course it's not as if the oak tree is the only plant in the world with a microbiome, as Jim was talking about. You know, hopefully our way of understanding oak health and the oak microbiome can, we're at least assuming, will be easily applied across the entire forest management community of the UK and beyond, and indeed beyond the forest management community as well. Understanding tree health, plant health in general will be important. But secondly, how may an engineered probiotic intervention or an applied solution, as Jim was discussing, to AOD, how might that be understood and deployed? What might that look like practically and in context? And what are the kind of deployments or interventions or solutions, or treatments is perhaps the word I'm struggling to find. What might that treatment look like, and how might oak managers be convinced or be enthusiastic to deploy that across their trees and across their, because obviously any as was also mentioned in the backstop project, is any solution, any treatment to AOD and tree health. You know, it's not as if we can get a 747 and crop dust Kent. That's just not going to happen in the real world. So any kind of treatment, any kind of probiotic solution has to be one which can be applied effectively, relatively cheaply, and at a large scale across the United Kingdom. And it has to be done primarily, of course, by oak managers themselves. That's generally, or by people that they might contract. So how is that going to work in practice? And basically, we are hoping to align our research and to link up our work with what we're called with probiotic environmentalities and disease topologies, but more broadly about the way that we imagine. So this kind of environmental imaginings of the forest, of woodland, and of oak trees themselves. You know, looking beyond seeing the trees for the forest, or indeed the microbiome for the trees, as the case may be. So what methods are we going to be using to sort of engage with this? Well, our sort of three methodological tools we're going to be drawing on: interviews, a survey, and shared dialogue workshops. So within interviews, we're going to be conducting about 40 or so, probably slightly more than 40 and 50 in-depth, semi-structured interviews with oak managers. Really so that we can get a very deep dive into their sort of knowledge base and understandings and experiences of oak health, of tree health and management, but also their sort of deep understandings of the microbiome itself. And this is what I was saying about, you know, where these knowledge streams are coming from. We really want to sort of deeply engage with how people are understanding and conceptualizing their trees and their forest management practices. Okay. And we're going to be drawing this from across the UK, looking at particularly interested in some areas such as East Anglia, where AOD is very prevalent, looking at some areas such as Scotland, where AOD isn't currently present, but drawing on the bulk of our interviewees from that kind of middle ground, where AOD is present, but perhaps hasn't fully took hold of the sort of tree environment there. We're also going to be working with the Silver Foundation and their British Woodland Survey, which I'm sure most of you will be familiar with in some capacity, to do a large-scale, a large-scale survey with a broad scope across the entirety of the UK's forest management community. Really giving us this kind of combination, as you can see very obviously there, between breadth and depth in our sort of data gathering tools, looking to get a very holistic and very grand picture of understandings of managers of the microbiome and tree health and AOD across the UK. And then finally, we're going to be deploying 3 to 4 shared dialogue workshops. And these are a very exciting opportunity to look between to sort of share information between forest managers on the one hand and the research team on the other. And so that information and expertise can flow back and forward between these two groups to greatly inform and shape the way that we're conducting and engaging with this research, and in particular about how we hope to build an engineered intervention. Hopefully one which is informed by the sort of direct experience of oak managers, but also with the sort of scientific laboratory work of our research team. Yeah, so we're going to be building a sort of shared experience or a shared research outcomes in that direction. That's actually pretty much us. I might just see if Alejandra, she was having, I don't know if she's joined us, in our third member of our team who only joined us just last week. I don't know if Alejandra is with us. Got into the meeting.
Hi.
Just to introduce yourself to everyone, because me and Jim have had our chance.
Yeah, hi. So yeah, I'm Alejandra. I joined the group a few days ago. I will be the research assistant of the group, and I will have some experience with bacterial plant diseases and acute oak decline for my master's project, which I also did at Bangor University a year ago. So we basically found like a few oak isolates with potential suppressive effect against some of the pathogens associated with acute oak decline. So yes, that's me.